So how do you know if your marriage is truly over? How do you know when it's time to throw in the towel? I always like to say that you can leave a marriage, but you're going to take yourself with you. That's why over 60% of second marriages end in divorce. Most spouses who are leaning out of a marriage, they have this fantasy that when they divorce, they're going to be ending their problems. But in reality, the dynamics that you're part of now, they're going to play out later with someone else. That's just always the case unless you do the inner work to change your default modes of relating, which include who you're even attracted to in the first place. So today I'm going to give you some things to consider and some guidelines to help you decide if your marriage is truly over and when it's really okay to walk away. This is for you if you're really committed to your marriage, but you're questioning and you're struggling and you're wondering, is it time to let go? And you're needing some reference points to know the difference between normal difficulties in a marriage that could be worked through and the things that make it impossible to stay in the marriage and also be healthy at the same time. So the first thing that you have to try to do is transform the marriage by changing whatever part you play in the dynamic, right? To heal yourself, get clear on your vision and how to show up to invite, create, and sustain that vision. I truly believe that most of the time relationships are fixable if both spouses want to stay together and they get the right help. But once you've done that, let's say that you've tried to fix the relationship and your efforts have been consistent over at least a year with no improvement. Then you want to consider the guidelines that I'm about to share. But first ask yourself the question, do I feel good about how I'm showing up? Have I done all that I can? Do I feel like I've learned what I need to learn about healthy relating and cleaned up my side of the street? If your answer is no, then you've got to do the inner work first. And if you do, don't be surprised if your whole marriage transforms as a result of your personal up-leveling. But if the answer is yes, then now is the appropriate time to consider parting ways, because if you've showed up in all the healthy ways and you've done the work and your partner just cannot grow to meet you there, then it might not be possible to have a healthy relationship with that person. I believe that sometimes we have to make the health of the relationship more important than the person. Like, we can still love that person, but just from afar if it means keeping relational health in your life, which is so important and critical to overall wellness and longevity. The second thing you want to consider is, am I with somebody with a personality disorder? Is your spouse a narcissist? Now, I believe this term is very overused because most people do have narcissistic traits and it's kind of a buzzword right now, but I'm talking about a pervasive and predictable pattern of the following things: lack of empathy, inability to take accountability, an ongoing commitment to misunderstanding you, gaslighting, emotional manipulation, and continual disregard for your emotional safety. I consider a personality disorder a precondition for a healthy marriage, which means it absolutely would have to be addressed or resolved before you could have a healthy relationship. And truly, the odds of this are very low due to the nature of the personality disorder, right? The very definition of that is that you've got deeply entrenched modes of relating that are dysfunctional. And there's a strong tendency in that type of spouse to defend themselves and their ego at all costs, including you. Now, if you want to learn more about this and narcissism in particular, check out my video about that. And also check out Melanie Tonia Evans. I'll put her name in the video description. That way you can both identify if that's what you're dealing with and also learn to heal from this internally. If you're with a narcissist or another personality disordered spouse, you ultimately have to choose between that person and your health. And maybe there are ways that you can stay depending on the severity, but you would 100% have to accept the limitations of the relationship if you did. You won't get your needs met, and you have to own the choice of staying in that situation, right? But I do not recommend that for anybody. It may be a very hard decision to walk away from somebody like that, especially if you're really committed to your marriage, but being healthy is in the best interest of anybody who loves you or anybody that you care about, so it's okay to prioritize your health. Number 3, along the lines of personality disorder, there are 3 other significant preconditions that warrant letting go of a marriage. Okay, so the first thing is acute, untreated addiction or mental illness. So this could be addiction to alcohol or other drugs that are getting in the way of true connection. It can also include porn addiction, which I see all the time, and it's a massive killer of real intimacy. So if your spouse suffers from addiction and they're not willing to get help, or if they are denying that it's even a problem, your marriage can't grow or heal. You can still love them and you can care about their well-being and you can even stay married, but you don't have to live with them and you don't have to enable them. You can't have a healthy relationship with somebody who's mentally ill or in the throes of active addiction if they're not being treated properly. Now, if you're still managing a situation like that, your opportunity is to look at what is the secondary gain of staying in a situation like that. Are there any codependency issues that you are struggling with? And I recommend looking into codependency resources like Melody for this. And another thing that indicates that your marriage is over is abuse. Okay, so the vows to honor and cherish each other have already been broken if your spouse is abusive. And I'm making a distinction here between occasionally abusive behaviors, such as a verbal attack that might happen in an argument, and an abuser personality, what I would call an abuser. Okay, so this is going to be a consistent commitment to having power and control over access to you, control over what you do, what you have access to. And this can come in the form of actual physical violence, but even worse, verbal abuse, social isolation, financial control, and you might feel like you're walking on eggshells, like you're afraid to speak your truth. You can't set boundaries because if you do, you're not going to be safe. Abusers tend to externalize their locus of control, and they tend to blame everybody else, and they don't take responsibility for their abuse. They might express remorse and love bomb you afterwards, but unless they get anger management or real treatment to engage in deep personal work around this, it's not going to change. And in fact, I would go so far as to say it always gets worse without treatment. So if your spouse is abusive and they don't want to do the individual work, and I'm not talking couples work, but individual work, then your vows are already broken and you should leave the marriage. Now, if you need safety planning for this, I will put some resources in the video description below. And finally, there's a precondition of an outside romantic relationship or emotional affair that will not end. Now, this does not apply, of course, if you're in a mutually consenting polyamorous relationship. But let's say your spouse had an emotional affair and they're insisting on maintaining that friendship, or if they've had a full-blown affair and they're not going to end contact with their affair partner. That's a deal breaker in my book. And in this case, it's not you throwing in the towel, right? It's your spouse. They've made the choice to disregard what you need to heal from a betrayal that they inflicted. You can't start a fire, refuse to put it out, and then expect the other person is at fault for walking away from the fire. That's on them. They ruined it and they won't fix what they broke. So let them go if they continue to have their attachment needs met outside the marriage. The reason I say that is because once you're on the outside and they're confiding about you to others and they're putting other people on the inside, they've broken your vows. You can walk away with your head held high. Now, the fourth and final reason to consider that your marriage might be over is that you find that even after things are better, you've done the work, but you realize that you really have very different life dreams. So in other words, the things that you need to live your higher purpose or your spiritual path or your destiny or your calling, it's not possible if you stay with this person. Now, a lot of times it's possible even when we think that it isn't. And remember, you don't actually have to share the same exact life dreams as your spouse. But if your life dreams are mutually exclusive, then that's a reason to consider divorce. So for example, let's say you must have children as part of your life dreams and your spouse must not in order to live theirs. That's obviously not going to work without compromising one person so much that there would always be loss and there would always be resentment associated with the marriage. Or let's say your life dream is to have lots of connections with extended family and you're spending a lot of time with them and you live nearby, and your spouse's dream is living off grid and isolated, right? That's their dream. That just might not be workable. And it doesn't make anybody wrong, and it doesn't mean you don't love each other, but what you want out of life would have to be compromised so significantly in order to have the relationship. I personally don't believe that that's necessary, and obviously it's better if you have that figured out before you get married, but if you change or things come up after the fact, and you realize that there's just no way to support the full expression of each individual's growth and well-being within the marriage, then that relationship is going to hold you back. And I believe marriage should allow us to expand, not require us to constrict and cut off parts of ourselves in order to survive. So make sure you really think about your life dreams. What are your deal breakers versus your nice to haves? And share them with your spouse. See if they align or if there's a way that you can get them to align. Now, let's say you share your vision and your life dreams with your spouse and they don't align. There still always is the possibility that you could come together from the us place and ask the question, is there a way, like, you want X, I want Y? How can we each have what we want and still be together? Let's think outside the box. You can get really creative and think of unconventional ways to accomplish staying together, even with separate life dreams. Your marriage just might look a little different than the average marriage. It's absolutely possible and it can result in growth, but only if it won't create resentment. That's the thing. If it does, then it's okay to say, you know what, this marriage no longer works. So hopefully this gives you some clarity, and if you want to go deeper into knowing if your marriage is truly over, check out my video called The Marital Point of No Return on how to save your marriage before it's too late. And if you like my content, please take a second to like this video, and even better, subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my weekly updates, and it also helps my content reach more people. So that's all for this week. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time.